Well, go ahead. I'm going to try to teach that to everybody. Most of you already know most of it. Have you got it, Mike? Can you get a real good close-up? All right, go ahead. That's the entire Old Testament. Huh? Well, it's not all the characters. Does everybody have one of these? Somebody come up here and get these and give them to everybody who doesn't have them. We're ready. Did you get one, John? Didn't remember giving you one. It's Sunday morning, and we're studying the Old Testament. I believe what people need is the Bible. They don't need 3 points, a poem, and 2 jokes in their messages. They need the Word of God. When you see the judgment of God that would come upon Israel for their apostasy and going after other gods, and people say, I don't go after other gods. You don't. Are you sure? The Bible says, covetousness is idolatry. And the word covetous, if I can find a place up here, is the word pleonectes. Pleonectes means want more. If you have ever wanted more house, more carats in your diamond ring, more car, more anything, then you have been an idol worshiper. And the idol you worship is self. If a man invents a god, he builds a god and he puts the laws in that god that he wants in there. And that's what man does about himself. Your car or your house can be just as much of a god as these people in the ancient world when they would bow down to Baal or Grove or Shemash or Molech, or some Southeast Sea Islander when they bow to one of those tiki gods and they take some virgin up on a volcano and cast her in. It's the same thing. It's just a man's imagination about appeasing a god, and that's what this is about. This is a picture timeline of the Old Testament in its entirety. And that I said, you can fill in the events and the characters. Once you learn this timeline, you've got down the Old Testament. Most of you here have seen me and heard me put this part of the timeline up here on the board, simple. And then down here, from here over to here. This is Israel's kingdom. And the way I usually put that on the board, I'll usually say, well, from 1 Samuel through 2 Chronicles, 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Chronicles, I'll say this is Israel's history, and all during this time Israel went after Baal in the grove. That's the way I'll usually put it on the board, in grove. And then after you get through the books of the kings, well, first of all, the books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That is called Torah by the Jews. We call it Pentateuch. Pent means 5. Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible. Pentateuch. Pentateuch. Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible, or Torah. Torah. The Jews call that Torah, or the law. And then Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Judges. When you get, well, you start with Genesis. Chapter 1 is in the beginning. That's the beginning. I got much to say about that. More than just those words. But we're going to try to cover territory. Second chapter of Genesis, God creates man in his image. Male and female created he them. And we see that also in Genesis 1:26, verse 26. That's where it says he created man, and it talks about how he did it in chapter 2. Chapter 3, God creates the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in chapter 2. Chapter 3 is where Eve eats of the tree, and she gives to Adam, and he eats. And then they both die spiritually. Chapter 4, Cain kills Abel. Cain is the eldest, Abel's the second born. And then after chapter 4, Adam knew his wife Eve in verse 25 of chapter 4. Verse 25, Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bare another in the place of Abel, whom Cain slew, and they called his name Seth. Seth, right there. Genesis 5 starts the bloodline of Adam, or the bloodline of Israel. So you have Seth. Seth means substitute. He was the substitute for Abel. Seth took up Abel's lineage, and it's carried all the way down to Jacob, who becomes Israel. Well, here's the bloodline. Genesis 5, Adam, Seth, Enosh. This is all in Genesis, the 5th chapter. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Lamech's son is Noah. This is father, son, grandson, great-grandson, great-great-grandson, and so forth, till you get down to Noah. And Noah is the 10th from Adam, and then he's got 3 sons, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. We get the word Semitic. Semitic. From the word Shem, and that's Jewish. Jewish. Of course, the Jews don't begin till we get down here to Abraham. Shem has a son, Arphaxad. Arphaxad's son is Salah. Salah's son is Eber. Eber's son is Peleg. Peleg's son is Reu. Reu's son is Serug. Serug's son is Nahor. And Nahor's son is Terah. Now, Terah has a son. His name is actually Abram. Abram, which means proud father. And God says to Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred to a land that I'll show you in Genesis 12. As I said, I'm not giving you all the characters. I'm giving you all the main characters. I'm going to give you the kings. I'm going to give you the prophets. I gave you this paper. I'll stop for a moment. I gave you this paper, and I've got two different historians. If you notice, I gave you two lists of the prophets. You're going to notice in the list of the prophets, of course, you had 5 major prophets. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where's the other major prophet? Who is he? Huh? No. I'm talking about major prophets according... I think Elijah was a major prophet. I'm talking about major prophets according to these theologians. They come up and named them. Who's the other major prophet? Huh? No. He's in that list. There he is, Daniel. Doesn't anybody remember who the fifth major prophet is? No. He is a major prophet, but I'm talking about according to what the theologians say. Moses. Moses wrote 5 books. He wrote the Pentateuch. There are other prophets. Samuel certainly is a major prophet to me. Elijah is a major prophet to me. Elisha is a major prophet to me. These are the prophets that are named in the Bible because they wrote books. Let's go ahead and put Moses there. Moses. But if you'll notice, I gave you 2 different lists for one reason. Mainly because to show you, it speaks of Elijah on one list from 870 to 845, and over here it says 875 to 850. Then go down to, let's say, down to Jonah 786, and Jonah over here. Where's Jonah? 781, Jonah. Jonah over here, 786. And sometimes they'll be 20 and 30 years off. These are, usually I'll put a question mark behind their name because we don't know exactly when these guys were, but we know they were approximately where they were in this timeline. Whenever I put that little short timeline on the board, 1 Samuel through 2 Chronicles, what I've done is spelled it out here. It starts over here with Saul, the first king, and this is the kingdom of God, all the way over to here with Jeremiah, the last prophet. So, y'all seen me put all this on the board, but not in as much detail, haven't you? You've seen me put it on the board. What I'm doing, if you notice, I've got all the prophets underlined with red. I want you to see that. Because we want to know, when you get to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Then you go into, when you get through with the history of Israel, you go into Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. That's the Old Testament books. Well, a lot of people, when they get over there to the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, etc., and they get to these here, which is the last section of the Bible, of the Old Testament, people don't know what to do with these guys. Where do they belong? They belong in the history of Israel because they're prophesying to all these kings, most of them for doing evil. Where's that map? Bring my map back over here. Somebody took that away. I can't live without that. Huh? Yeah. I can't live without it. All right. That's fine right there. Just back it up there. Here are the kings of Israel right here. These kings, and they put some of the prophets on here. Here's all the kings, northern Israel, southern Judah, and southern Judah with southern Israel. They put some of the prophets out of the side here, but they didn't put all of them, and they've got another opinion about when they lived. We know approximately when they lived because we know that when Ahab was alive, who was the guy that was preaching to him in that 18th and 19th chapter of 1 Kings? That was Elijah, wasn't it? He's the one that called fire down from heaven. So we know that Elijah was the prophet for Ahab. There are ways that the historians come up and try to do some professional guesswork, figuring out where these prophets come from or where they are. We know approximately where most of them are, Nobody knows when Joel lived. They're guessing when Obadiah lived. They're not sure. So you'll see question marks after this. I've got a book here. Now, I've been studying Old Testament for 58 years, since about 1956. I was a teenager then, and I've spent a lifetime studying. I put a lot of these things together. I had to study all my life to make these characters come together all through the Old Testament. But here's this kind of book you can get, Rose Book of Bible Charts and Maps. I pulled one of your prophets out of this, and I've also got the, and you can get on the back page, I got a list of all the kings of Israel, from 1 Samuel to 2 Chronicles. All the kings of Israel right here. Up here is Saul, David, and Solomon, the first three kings. And then because of Solomon's apostasy, allowing his wives to go after their... Everybody here knows this has been coming here. Don't you? You know, I want everybody that understands basically what I'm saying, raise your hand. So if you're here and you don't understand it, I want you to know that the truck drivers here can understand it. The guys that have been machinists, like Gerald, understands what I'm doing because I put it on the board 500 times, not to this degree. Now, you got all the kings here, and the prophets belong. Let me show you one way how you can figure out where these prophets belong. A simple way, but they're not exact. When you turn to one of the prophets if you have a King James Bible, everything I'm doing is not hard. It may be intricate in detail, but it's not hard. You turn to one of the prophets, turn to Isaiah, the first chapter, if you have a Thompson chain, and here's chapter 1 of Isaiah. Right to the left, it says 760 BC. Now that's going to be approximate. Another way to find out when these guys lived. So, what you do, if you're looking at the books of the kings, look here. Go over here to Kings or Samuel. Let's go to the Kings. And let's just look here. Look here in 1 Kings. Let's look over here where Elijah is. 1 Kings, the 16th chapter. Let's say the 17th chapter. When Elijah goes and stands before Ahab and tells him there'll be no rain for 3.5 years. Right out to the left of that, it says 910 BC. So when you take the dates off of your prophets, you can actually thumb through the kings and say, well, here's 910, so the next page must be later than that. There's 906. Here's 906. Here's 899. So you can actually look in your prophets and thumb through your books of the kings and find out just about where that prophet and what king he was prophesying to. Can you see that? That's real simple, isn't it? Now, I've spent a lifetime studying this. I was familiar with it to a degree, but these kind of things help me. These books help tremendously. You can pick these up over at Logos Bookstore. They've got all kinds of these things. I've got a big one up here. I've got a big one. I want you to learn the Bible. That's what I'm here for. I want you to learn the Bible. Here's Time Chart of Biblical History. You can go in here and these things will stretch out all along a table. I mean, it will. Let me see here. You see? Look at that. You can lay that out. The characters in it are phenomenal. Somebody help me here. All right, fold it up. Hold that up there. Just hold it up for a minute. You see, you can go in here and you can study these charts. Now, understanding it is something else. This is all these characters, empires, pagans, everything you can think of. All right. Somebody gave it to me. They got them at Logos. You can get them at Logos. But the ones that are more practical, that's very difficult stuff. The other one there, what did I do with it? Okay, these are very practical. Very practical. It'll give you all kinds of things on parables of Jesus. Here's English Bible. Goes through here and gives you all of Jesus' parables, has them laid out. And it has pictures of the temple, pictures of Jerusalem. These are very good. All kinds of charts. All kinds of charts. These are very good. Now, where was I? You can also find out if you've got what? What's that book again? The Great Big One. Well, come over here and get it later. Okay. We don't want to get the titles now. If you've got McClintock and Strong, or some set of biblical encyclopedias, when you get into the prophets, if you get into Joel, pull out the J volume, open it up, and read something on Joel and its history. It'll tell you approximately when it might say, Movers says Joel lived at such and such. Movers is a historian. It'll say Pliny, but Pliny says you cannot trust historians to be accurately together because that was the ancient world. They're doing the best they can. So whenever you look at these, the thing wrong with this second one, I think it's the second one. One of these left Daniel out, and it was evidently a misprint. So I gave you 2 copies by 2 different historians, and the dates will differ some. But they're going to give you approximate dates, and you can take the approximate dates and fit them into this timeline of history, and you can tell where these guys, who they're prophesying to. In fact, I'm going to put, next week, I'm just going to put the timeline of the history of Israel up here. I'm going to put all the prophets where they belong, and we're going to go through those prophets. I'm going to give you some highlights of each book's, who they're preaching to. They're all preaching either against northern Israel, southern Judah, or they're preaching against Moab, which is southern Jordan, or Ammon, which is the land of Ammon, the northern Jordan, or Syria, or what we call Lebanon, Tyre and Sidon, or Egypt, or Ethiopia. And the reason these prophets are preaching against them is because they have polluted Israel. Israel is on the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. There's Israel right there. And the gods of Jordan, what we call Jordan, Ammon, the land of Ammon. The gods of Ammon was Molech, Moloch, Milcom, Malcolm. All these are variables of the same name. The gods of southern Jordan, or the land of Moab, was Shemash. See, you said that with me, didn't you, Gary? He went, as I said it. So y'all know these things. The god of Syria, Rimmon, which was the pomegranate god, they said was on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden. They all had a form of believing in the beginning. Tyre and Sidon was Lebanon, and they all polluted Israel with idolatry worship. So all these prophets are prophesying to Israel or to the nations around them, and I'm going to just kind of give you highlights through all these prophets about what they're saying and who they're talking to. Now, keep that for reference. Maybe we can take and put this, or at least the history of Israel, on one paper. Now, if you'll notice, all these prophets, I've got them here underlined in red, and I've got the king that they're prophesying against, Jonah. Well, he wasn't prophesying against Jeroboam. He prophesied against the capital city of Assyria, which was Nineveh. It's on the Tigris River in what we call Iraq. That's ancient Babylon. Ancient Babylon. And Iraq has the Tigris River, Euphrates coming down, meeting about 100 miles or so above the Persian Gulf. And Babylon is built on the Euphrates, And Nineveh was on the Tigris, or the approximate areas of where Baghdad is. In that neighborhood is where Nineveh was. So Jonah is going to preach to Nineveh, and Nahum was preaching to Nineveh also. In fact, the first verse of Nahum says, Nahum, the burden of Nineveh. And then he immediately proceeds to condemn the Assyrian Empire for slaughtering Israel. Now, let's get back to the board. I want you to learn this timeline. A little bit at a time you can learn what these... I want the people at Grace and Truth to learn the Bible. That's what I want. I don't mean it for selfish reasons. I'm not here to be popular. People don't need this mush going on in these churches. They need to know the Bible. Let's get back to where I was earlier. Now, we've gone through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. We go through, and we get down here to Abraham in Genesis. Abraham gets the land in Genesis 17. God promises the land in Genesis 12. Abraham was born somewhere around 2166 BC. When he left the land of Haran, which is what we call Iraq, which the ancients called Babylon, but before that, it was called Haran. Haran. When Abraham left Babylon, or the land of Haran, same thing we called Iraq, he was approximately 70 years old. 70. Then God gives him the covenant in Genesis 17, and he promises the covenant to a son named Isaac, and that's a little over a year before Isaac is born. God names Isaac. He says, I'll bless Ishmael, your son, by Hagar, out of Genesis the 16th chapter, but my covenant goes to Isaac, and he gets the land. Then when Jacob cheats his brother, Isaac has twin sons, Esau and Jacob. When Isaac cheats Esau out of his birthright, and the Bible says, when Rebekah had conceived by one, even by her father Isaac, for the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth, it was said unto Rebekah, the elder Esau shall serve the younger Jacob, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. Of course, loved is agape, and that means to walk in the commandments of God. And Jacob's name is changed to Israel in Genesis, the 32nd chapter. Jacob is leaving, rushing away from the land to hide from Esau's wrath because he stole the birthright. But God turns around and gives it to Jacob through Isaac in the 28th chapter. And then God himself says, the land where you're lying is going to be yours. That's when he's at Bethel. He's on his way out in Genesis, I put 25, it's 28. Excuse me. Genesis, the 28th chapter. Somebody should have caught that, shouldn't he? Huh? Is that y'all's fault because you didn't catch it? All right, now, let me get a drink. What? All right. Am I blocking the side? I need not. Just leave it right there. I can turn it this way. Just leave it right there. Here. I'm really wanting y'all to learn these things. There's no need in teaching this mush in these churches. Now, Jacob gets the covenant and the land in Genesis 28, and his name is changed to Israel in Genesis 32nd chapter. Then Jacob has 12 sons. And he has 11 of the sons when he's over there in the land of Haran, or in the land of what we call Babylon. Has 11 of the sons over here. Then after at least 20 years there, he heads back. God moves on his heart to come back to Israel. It's not called Israel yet. He's called Israel. It's still the land of Canaan, but it will be Israel before it's over with. Now God moves on his heart, and he comes back, and he has Benjamin when he gets down to Bethlehem. And Rachel is Benjamin's mother. Now I've got it right here. The first 4 sons are by Leah, Jacob's first wife, but Rachel is his beloved. And of course you know the story. Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, and Laban, his mother's brother, gave him Leah instead. Well, he said, I'll work another 7 years for Rachel. So he worked 7 years, and Rachel is his beloved. Beautiful woman. Leah's a gentle, tender-hearted person. And Leah has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. And out of Judah, her fourth-born son will be the king of Israel. The scepter will not depart from Judah. And then Rachel comes up, and she says, I've got to have sons, but I can't because I am barren. So she takes her handmaiden, Bilhah, sends her into Jacob, and she has Dan and Naphtali. And these sons become a part of Israel. They are sons of Jacob by the handmaiden. And then Leah comes up and says, what about my handmaiden, Zilpah? P-A-H. Zilpah. And she sends Zilpah into Jacob. And he has 2 sons, Gad and Asher, by Zilpah. And what they would do would bear the sons upon the knees. That meant they would bow down somehow on a stool. Leah would bow on the stool in front of her handmaid, and as she had the baby, it would come out between her knees, and she could say that was her child. And then Leah has 2 more sons, and between Issachar and Zebulun, Jacob has 1 daughter. Her name is Dinah. And all of this happens, other than Benjamin, these 11 sons, they happen in Genesis. Well, I got it up here. Genesis 29 and 30. You'll see all these sons born except Benjamin, and Benjamin's born in Genesis the 35th chapter, 35. And then the priesthood will come out of Levi, the 3rd son of Jacob. These 12 sons have 12 tribes, and they become the nation of Israel. And the priesthood will come out of Levi, the king will come out of Judah, and the inheritance will come out of Joseph through his second-born son Ephraim. That's in Genesis, the 48th chapter, when Jacob lays his right hand upon Ephraim and gives him the covenant of the land. So Ephraim is the owner. And he will be called Northern Israel, or when he's long dead, when you see Ephraim referred to, or when you see Samaria referred to, or you see Joseph referred to as a nation, it's talking about northern Israel, because Ephraim, Samaria is another name for northern Israel. Joseph is a name for northern Israel. Ephraim is a name for northern Israel. Now, these are the sons, and you're getting close to you're coming down close to the end of Genesis. And then we know the story of Joseph. Joseph goes into bondage in the 37th chapter of Genesis. His brothers sell him into bondage. We're not going to go through Joseph's whole story. So Joseph is in the 37th chapter through the 50th chapter of Genesis. That's the story of Joseph. His brothers sell him into bondage out of jealousy because of his dreams. In his dreams, he shows that his brothers are going to bow down to him. He tells them this. They sell him into bondage. And he ends up in the house of Potiphar, the captain of the guard for Pharaoh. And he goes in, Potiphar puts him in his house, and Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph. And then he yanks away from her and says, I cannot do this and sin against God, and he runs. Well, she starts screaming and hollering and said, Joseph tried to rape me. Now, Joseph was very fair to look upon. Extremely handsome man. Potiphar's wife, since Potiphar was the captain of the guard there in the 39th chapter of Genesis, the captain of the guard of Egypt could get any woman he wanted. So you can believe the reason Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph was because she was good looking. If she had been ugly as a mud fence, she wouldn't have tried, would she? You can bet that she was hot. And he was extremely handsome, and he ran away, and he was a godly man. He said no. So he's thrown into prison. He gets into prison with Pharaoh's butler, which was his cupbearer, which was his most trusted man. He was the man that brought his cups, and he had to taste them in the event there was any poison in them. It was called a butler. It was a cupbearer. And his baker was in there. Well, he interprets the baker's dream, and he's hung, taken out and hanged. And he interprets the butler's dream, so you're going to be restored. Well, after a while, the butler says, the king has 2 dreams. He can't get any of his soothsayers to be able to interpret them. And he comes up and says, the butler says, oh, I have forgotten myself. This Joseph who interpreted my dream, he told me not to forget him, and I've forgotten him. Well, he had to forget him, so he would be prime and ready to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Interprets Pharaoh's dream. Joseph is set up as second in charge of Egypt. And then he calls his family over. There's 70 people in his family, Jacob included, Jacob being Israel. And they go over to Israel. And they're taken to Egypt. Taken to Egypt. They're over there 400 years. And Moses comes along in Exodus, the 2nd chapter. He's birthed. He is prophesied by the prophets to be the deliverer of Israel. They're in the wilderness 40 years, and he comes in to deliver Israel. When he delivers Israel at the end of the 400 years, the end of the 400 years is in Exodus, the 12th chapter. Remember, there's 10 plagues, and the last plague in Exodus 12 is the Passover. Passover, when he says, when I see the blood on the doorpost of the house, I will pass over you, and I won't kill the firstborn in the house. So they go into the wilderness. God gives Moses the law. They go directly to Sinai. They're at the Passover. Pentecost is exactly 50 days after the Passover. They go 10 days into the desert, 10 days into the desert. And then Moses is 40 days upon the mountain, and he comes down with the law in his hand. That's 50 days. When he comes down from the mountain with the law in his hand, that's the first Pentecost. Now, 40 years in the wilderness. This is the book of Numbers. When they leave Sinai, Mount Sinai, where Moses gets the law, they leave Sinai. 40 years in the wilderness, from Sinai to crossing the Jordan River, that is the book of Numbers. Deuteronomy, duo, nomos, means second law. That's the law that was written to verify the rest of the law, particularly Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Any laws that are given in those books are verified. A lot of them are verified a second time in the book of Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy is written just as Israel is about to cross the Jordan River. In fact, we see Moses dying in the last chapter of Deuteronomy. Jim, I thought you said Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. He didn't write the last chapter, did he? We couldn't do that. He was dead. Usually, when a man is writing a book, one of his assistants or associates finishes it up. It was probably Joshua that finished the book of Deuteronomy, showing that Moses died at 120 years old. He's 80 years old when they leave the land. When they leave the land after 400 years, he's 80. There's 40 years in the wilderness. How old does that make Moses? 120. That's right. So he's 120 when they get there. Moses is not allowed to cross the river and go in and possess the land. When they're in the wilderness in the book of Numbers, God tells Moses to speak to the rock out of which the water would come so the children of Israel could have water. Moses is mad and angry at the children of Israel, and he whacks the rock twice. God says, just for that, you're not going into the land. When you get to the end of Deuteronomy, and we'll cover this, Moses is begging and pleading with the Lord in tears, saying, please, God, let me go see the promised land. He said, no. You can go up on Mount Nebo, which is just on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and you can go into Mount Pisgah, and we sing of Mount Pisgah's lofty heights, and you can look over and you can see the land, but you can't go. Moses is brokenhearted. And so God takes Moses up into a mountain, and we have no idea what happened to him. Evidently, God killed him, took him home. He's 120. But his strength was not abated. He was as strong as the day when he was 20 years old. He was strong as an ox at 120. All right. So Joshua leads the children of Israel. You got this top timeline. We're starting with it. Here's number 1, number 2, number 3 in the timeline. So we're going through this number 2. And I had to kind of go down this way because I had all these names up here. That's not some theological thing. I'm just wanting to continue here. Okay? So Joshua leads them into the land. One of the first places they go, after they leave Sinai, they go to a place called Kadesh Barnea. And at Kadesh Barnea is down here in the Negev Desert, just below Israel. They go to Kadesh Barnea, and God tells the men in the army of Israel, you had to be 20 years old to serve in the army. The land of Anak, which was on the southwestern end of Israel, the land of Anak is what we call the Gaza Strip today. During the days of David, they called that the land of the Philistines. If Israel is here, I ain't got no place to put it. All right, down here. If this is Israel, here's the Mediterranean Sea. The land of Anak, or the Gaza Strip, is right there. That's also the land of the Philistines, southwestern border of Israel. And God tells them to go into the land of Anak and take it. Well, they have something there called Anakims, or they're giants in the land, and these are evidently ancestors to Goliath, the Philistine champion. Well, the people say, the soldiers go in, they spy it out, and they say, the people are too big, we can't conquer them. They have forgotten that God conquered the greatest army in the world when he drowned Pharaoh and his armies in the Red Sea. So God says, and they were up there spying out the land 40 days. 40 days. He said, I'm going to put you through the wilderness. I'm going to put you in the wilderness for 40 years. A year for every day you were in the land, and you refused to go in and conquer the land. I'm going to put you in the wilderness until I cleanse the land and cleanse Israel of all unbelief. What he's saying, I'm going to kill everybody from 20 years old and upward in Israel, except for 2 men. The 2 men that said, we will go into this land of Anak, the 2 men was Joshua and Caleb. This is why when we get to the judges, the first judge in Israel is Caleb's nephew, Othniel. That's why. Now, so Joshua leads the people into the land in the book of Joshua. And they have some battles. They fight the Battle of Jericho. And they fight the city of Ai. That's where one fellow takes a little wedge of gold and a Babylonian garment. So they go into the land. And the book of Joshua, besides going in and starting to battle the people of the land, God gave the land to Abraham. But they've been gone for over 600 years. What happens when you walk out of your house and you stay away for 600 years? Well, a bunch of thugs and punks come in and they start a crack house, don't they? And that's what these guys did. They come in over there. And no telling what they're doing over there, but they're possessing the land. God tells Joshua, go into the land and kick them out, everybody. And they don't. They marry them. Huh? Great day in the morning. Well, when they come into the land, Joshua's main job was to conquer the land and divide the land up between the tribes. 12 tribes between the tribes. Over here, you can see the tribes. See these names right here? Which is Jacob's sons. That's their names right here. Here is Manasseh, the firstborn of Joseph. There is Ephraim, the secondborn of Joseph. Here's Dan. Remember, he is that fifth son of Jacob by Bilhah. Here's Simeon, secondborn of Jacob. Judah, fourthborn. Reuben, firstborn. Here's Gad. There's Gad. He's the 7th son, and he is born of Leah, and so forth. This is what Joshua's job was to do. It was to divide the land up among the tribes, and that's what he's doing here in the book of Joshua. Now, Joshua goes into the land to possess the land in the book of Judges, and God tells Israel, drive these people out. And because they didn't drive the people out, you get to that 3rd chapter, Joshua dies. And what does Israel do? A new generation rises up that doesn't know Jehovah God. And they go back after Balaam and Ashtaroth. They keep going. Baal and Grove, let me say it again. Let me insert it. It's the same system that Constantine brought into the church in 325 A.D. It renamed Christ Mass or Christmas. It is the same as the pagan worship of ancient Israel when God scattered them throughout the earth. Now, you've got in Judges, the 3rd chapter, God says, I'm going to put you under. In fact, you might look at that. Let's just go to Judges and kind of read a verse once in a while. Judges, Joshua Judges, and God says in the 3rd chapter, these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel. I'm going to put you in fire, and I'm going to prove you by these nations that's going to attack you consistently. To prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the wars of Canaan. Israel was not a fighting nation. They were brought through 40 years in the wilderness. The book of Judges, they're coming in to repossess the land that was given to Abraham over here. Given to Abraham here. They're going back into the land to possess the land in the book of Judges. This is around 1425 BC. When they left the land, it was around 1447 BC. And Moses was born 80 years before that, so he was born around 527 BC. That's approximately when Moses was born. Then it says, verse 1, chapter 3 of Judges. Now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel. Prove means to put in a fire. It means to mature them. Even as many of Israel's had not known all the wars of Canaan, only that the generations of the children of Israel might know to teach them war. I need to teach them how to war, so I'm going to put them under the rule of these nations. At the least, such as before knew nothing thereof, namely 5 lords of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Zidonians, which is what we call Lebanon, the Hivites that dwell in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal-Hermon unto the entering in of Hamath, and they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. The children of Israel dwelt among them. They were supposed to drive them out, weren't they? But they made covenants with them and married them. And they took their daughters to their wives and gave their daughters to their sons and served their gods. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and forgot the Lord their God and served Balaam and the grove. The Christmas tree is the grove. So they're coming into the land. So God says, because you've done this, I'm going to put judges to rule you in the land. So somewhere between 255 to 300 years, they're under these 13 judges. 13. 12 are in the book of Judges. Samuel is the 13th judge. There were 13 apostles, wasn't there? Huh? No. There were 13 apostles. Paul was an apostle. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. Paul said, I was one born out of due time. There's 13 judges. Samuel is the 13th judge. There's 13 tribes of Israel. Joseph's tribe was split in two because the Levites, the priests, are going to live all over Israel, and they're not going to have a land inheritance. So Joseph's two sons make up for the extra tribes. So you got 13 tribes of Israel. You got 13 tribes, 13 apostles, and 13 judges. And these are the judges. The first judge was Othniel, the nephew of Caleb. Only two men that were over 20 years old, Joshua and Caleb, were allowed to come into the land over 20 years old after this incident at the end, when they were in the wilderness, after this incident at Kadesh Barnea. Just say Kadesh. After they didn't want to go into the land and fight the Anakims because they were too big. So God says, I'll prove you. So the only two that go into the land, Joshua and Caleb. Caleb's nephew, Othniel, is the first judge in Israel. And the reason being because of this very thing. The second judge is a left-handed man, Ehud. The Jews said if you were left-handed, you were evil. The word left in the Latin is the word sinis, S-I-N-I-S. And we get the word sinister from that. They said left-handed man. So God says, I'll give you a left-handed man. And then Shamgar was after him. And the Jews said, women are not supposed to lead us. God says, I'll give you a woman judge. How do you like that? So he gives them Deborah, then Gideon, and Gideon goes in and destroys all the Baal worship in Israel, and then they start doing it again. Every time one of these judges would die, Israel would go right back to doing their old tricks, worshiping Baal, Grove, Ashtaroth, Shemash, Molech. And God says, I'm your God and you're my people. Obey me, and your womb will be full, your fields will be full, you'll have plenty of crops, plenty of food, and you'll go against your enemy one way, and they'll flee 7 ways. But if you go after other gods, your enemy will come against you one way, and you'll flee 7 ways. And after every one of these would die, Israel went right back to their God worship. Gideon. And then a man named Tola, Jair. Then Jephthah. I love Jephthah. He was the son of a harlot. They said, get Jephthah out of the land. We're not going to have any harlot sons ruling us. They throw him out of the land. Then the Philistines attack him. They say, what are we going to do? We need a great general. Go get Jephthah. Tell him we're sorry. And Jephthah comes into the land, delivers Israel. Ebzan, next judge. Elon, the next judge. Abdon, judge. And then Samson, he was a judge. He killed 30 Philistines one day before dinner. And one day he picked up a jawbone of an ass and killed 1,000. Was it because he looked like Hercules? No. It was the power of God upon him. Then he got to running around with the wrong woman. Samson had women problems, and his woman problems is what killed him. And you know that Delilah didn't cut his hair. He was a Nazarite from his youth, and he was supposed to be a Nazarite. His hair was never to be cut. And she kept pleading with him. He said, if you bind 7 green withs in my hair, I'll lose my strength. And she keeps saying, you're making fun of me, you're taunting me. And finally he said, if you cut my hair, I'll lose my strength. It wasn't his hair that was his strength. It was his vow to God that was his strength, and he's going to break his vow. Did Delilah cut his hair? No. She called in a man with some shears to cut his hair. Came in, cut his hair, lost his strength, and then he goes out. The Philistines take him. His hair begins to grow back. He's put in prison. He's grinding a mill, probably like an ox pulling one of those things around in a circle, and he's grinding, and they're making fun and laughing, and he gets up between 2 pillars, and he says, Lord, give me the strength and let me go down with the Philistines. And he pushed the pillars down, and he killed more people, more Philistines in his death than he killed in his lifetime. Well, they blinded him, punched his eyes out. He grabbed hold of those pillars, and down they come. He was the next to the last judge in Israel. Then comes Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel. You don't see Samuel as the judge until you get to 1 Samuel. Of course, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, that is the history of Israel. History of Israel. Now, that takes us over here. What we do is we come to the end of the Judges. Now, this right here is the beginning of 1 Samuel. I've got this blank spot here between Samuel, the 1st chapter, blank spot. It's not blank, but that's when Samuel, the prophet, was the mouth of God upon the earth. He's the one that did the saying. God is the king. Samuel said, God was your king, and you wanted a man king. So in the 8th chapter, because of Samuel's sons, look at 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter. 1 Samuel 8. There's 3 sets of evil sons. 2 sons. Aaron had 2 sons that were evil. Who was that? Nadab and Abihu. And then Eli, the high priest, in that 2nd chapter of 1 Samuel, he had 2 sons that were evil. Remember their names? Hophni and Phinehas. That's right. You can say Hophni or Hophni, either one. And here's the 3rd set of sons that are evil. Their fathers were righteous. Eli was a righteous man. He just didn't make his children mind. They were accepting bribes and probably messing with the women at the temple. And they were high priests too. That's in the 2nd chapter of 1 Samuel. Then when you get down here to the 8th chapter of 1 Samuel, we're down here. Down here. We're in the 8th chapter. Chapter 8. This is somewhere around 1096 BC. This is the first king that's chosen, and it's all over this. It came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. They don't have a man king. You could call them judges. I wouldn't call them judges because they're so unrighteous. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second, Abiah or Abiah. Now, don't confuse this Joel with the prophet Joel. Joel was a common name. Manasseh was a common name. A lot of these men had common Jewish names. And they were judges in Beersheba, the southernmost city in Israel at that time. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after money, lucre, and took bribes and perverted judgment at the temple of God. And all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah and said unto him, Behold, Thou art old, and thy sons walk not in the ways. Now make us a king to judge us like the nations. And then Samuel goes on to warn him. If you get a king, God's your king, and he's got an arsenal that's incomparable. He's got lightning bolts in his arsenal. He's got earthquakes in his arsenal. He's got plagues in his arsenal. And you want some king that's got spears and bows and arrows? You must be crazy. Besides that, he'll take your sons and run them before chariots of the king. There'll be 50 of them running in front of the chariot of the king, which was the custom among the kings of Israel. And when they run before him, they'll be the first to die. They'll take your daughters away from your houses, put in the palace with the king, and there'll be confectioners baking and doing all this stuff, and you won't even see them. And you want a man to be king? They said yes. So God goes out and picks out Saul of the tribe of Benjamin. Wrong tribe to be a king. From the start, Saul is the wrong king. The scepter doesn't depart from Judah in the 49th chapter of Genesis. David was the tribe of Judah. Jesus is the Lion of Judah, and Jesus is a descendant of David. Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin, the 12th son. Wrong tribe. That's why when we see Saul in the 13th, 14th, 15th chapter of 1 Samuel, and he does one wrong thing after the other. The last thing he does, God tells him go down to Amalek through the mouth of Samuel, which is down here in the desert down here. Go to Amalek and utterly destroy the people of Amalek. Don't spare anyone, the babies, the sheep, the cattle, the king, nothing. And Samuel goes to see Saul after he comes back from Amalek. He says, I thought we told you to go utterly destroy Amalek. Well, I did, Saul said. Talking about excuse. But I couldn't help it, the people, and he heard the bleating of the sheep. Not bleating, bleating. He heard the bleating of the sheep, and he said, then what's this sound of these sheep? Well, Samuel, I couldn't help it. I'm just King Saul. And the people insisted that we bring back some of the sheep. And they insisted that we bring back this King Agag. I told you to kill everybody. Why would God do that? Just because he wanted to be mean? Nobody in the world was practicing any of the dietary laws, any of the quarantining, other than Israel. If someone had a disease down here at Amalek, they could have brought it back and wiped out all of Israel. He said, kill everything. He didn't, so God takes the kingdom away from him. He tells Samuel, you go down to Bethlehem, Judah, go to the house of Jesse, for I've chosen me a king among his sons. And he goes down there and makes 7 of his sons to pass before him. And when the 7th one comes by, God says, it's none of these. And David said, Samuel says, do you have any more sons? He said, I have the youngest, and behold, he's the youngest, and he keeps the sheep. And he says, get him, I'll not leave here before he comes in. And Jesse tells one of his sons, go get David. When he walks in, God says, that's him. And you know it's David. And David becomes king in God's eyes in that 16th chapter of 1 Samuel. But from the 16th to the 31st chapter, you got 2 views of who's king. God says David is king, and Israel says Saul is king. So when David goes out in the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel, and he kills Goliath, and he's brought back in and introduced to Saul by Abner, his commanding general, he brings David in. Abner says, King Saul, this is David. He says, yes, I remember him. I believe he played harp for me when I was feeling bad, and an evil spirit from God entered me over there in the 16th chapter. You're in the 18th chapter. Saul immediately begins to eye David and put the evil eye on him. They had an evil eye. They said if you look too closely at a baby, you're going to put an evil eye on it and it might die. Saul began to eye David. And the Bible says in the 18th chapter, right after David's introduced to him, because the women were singing, Saul is slain his thousands and David is 10,000s, Saul was just livid. I won't put up with this. And he picked up a spear and threw it at David. And he missed. He throws the Spirit at him again in the 19th chapter. After the 18th chapter, the 19th chapter, Saul says, I'm going to kill David. We're still in 1 Samuel. We're in the books of the Kings. Now, the man, who is the prophet at this time? Huh? Samuel. That was a trick question. Samuel's the prophet. Of course, you've got other prophets. You can't put them all in here. And then Saul pursues David all through his career, from the 19th chapter to the 31st chapter of 1 Samuel. Of course, you get into all of their adventures, and David catches him twice, and Abishai, David's nephew, says, Uncle David, I'll kill this dog. And David says, he is the anointed of the Lord. Don't you dare touch him. You'll die if you touch Saul. He was God's anointed, even though he got evil. Saul did some bad things. I believe it's the 23rd chapter, he killed 85 priests of God. So he's after David to kill David because he says, you're trying to steal my kingdom. And who is it that saves David?
His son.
Huh?
His son.
Who?
Jonathan.
Jonathan. Saul's son loves David. He acquiesces, which means gently to submit to David being the king. He says, I know you're going to be the king. Jonathan was a righteous man. He loved David with all his heart and soul. And he knows he's going to be king. Well, Saul keeps telling Jonathan, saying, Jonathan, this friend of yours, David, is going to steal your kingdom. It was all about money and power is all it was about. Of course, we get to the end of 1 Samuel. And we've got some prophets there. We get into 2. Saul falls on his sword and kills himself in 1 Samuel, the 31st chapter. But in the previous chapter, the night before, he goes to the witch of Endor, and he says, what's going to happen to me? Now, Saul is the king, and he's outlawed witchcraft and sorcery. So when he goes to the witch of Endor, E-N-D-O-R, I'm quite sure they got the word Endor off of bewitched from that. He goes to the witch of Endor. He says, I've got to talk to Samuel. And Samuel's been dead for 2 years since that 25th chapter. And she can't conjure up Samuel. God brings up Samuel, and the witch goes, I can't do that, and she takes off. He's been dead for 2 years. And Samuel looks at Saul. He says, you've been the anointed of the Lord because you have not executed the fierce wrath of God and done the things that God said. He said, tomorrow you're going to die, and you and your sons are going to be with me. And one of his sons that was with him in battle was Jonathan. We know that Jonathan went to be with the Lord. And Samuel said that Saul went to be with the Lord. And the next day, Saul, after the battle, he fell upon his own sword. Why would he fall upon his own sword and take his own life? Huh? He didn't want the enemy to get in hold of him because they would torture him. They did some bad things to those guys. It'd take him all kinds of torture. So he killed himself. And he went to be with the Lord. Then you get into 2 Samuel. And we've got a lot of adventures in 2 Samuel with David. We've got David in the 11th chapter. David is actually king in God's eyes. But in 2 Samuel, the 2nd chapter, he's king over Hebron. Hebron is in southern Judah. He's only partial king of Israel. He doesn't become king to all the tribes until the 5th chapter of 2 Samuel. And all the kings of the earth come to pay homage to David in the 5th chapter. Then we get over to the 11th chapter. David is sitting on the patio of the palace, one of the higher patios, and he looks down on a house below him, sees this beautiful, naked woman sunbathing. And he tells one of his people, I want her. Now, some people will say, I have led too evil a life to come to grace and truth. You've never done what David did. This woman was Bathsheba. It wasn't like David didn't know Bathsheba. He saw her naked there. He said, I want her. Her grandfather was Ahithophel, David's chief counselor. She had been in and out of the palace saying, is my grandfather here? Is Grandpa here? And he saw how beautiful she was that day. And he brings her over, has a sexual relationship with her. She gets pregnant. Whoops. King of Israel. Now the scripture says in the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel that David was ruddy and of a good countenance. Ruddy means red-faced. Some think he was perhaps red-faced, freckles, and red hair. That he certainly didn't look like Gregory Peck. No doubt. So he takes Bathsheba, and he's perhaps thinking, oh man, I wonder when she has this baby if everybody will recognize that it's got red hair and freckles and looks like me. I better do something. So he sends a message for Uriah, the wife of Bathsheba, to be brought in, the husband of Bathsheba, to be brought in from the land of Ammon, which is northern Jordan, and they're fighting the Ammonites. He comes back to Jerusalem, the palace of David, and David says, Uriah, I hear that you've had a tough time in battle. I think you deserve a rest. I need you to go home and have a wonderful night with your wife and sleep with your wife. He's saying to himself, muttering to himself, I hope when that baby's born that nobody will notice it looks like me. And the next morning, David gets up, goes out to the palace steps. And guess who is sleeping on the palace steps? Uriah the Hittite. One of David's most faithful soldiers. He says, I cannot go home with my wife and have a wonderful time with my wife at home while my King David is at battle with the Ammonites. David went, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? She's still pregnant. So he writes a note, hands it to Uriah. And Joab, David's nephew, is his commander up there in the land of Ammon. He says, take this to your commander. And Uriah was such an honorable man, he didn't look at the note. He takes it to Joab, commanding the forces up there fighting the Ammonites in northern Jordan. And the note says, put Uriah in the heat of battle so that he'll be killed and withdraw from him. Joab had no qualms about that. Joab was a murderer. He was a super fighter, but he would kill in a second. He killed many others. He killed Absalom. He killed Abner, murdered him. He killed Amasa, his cousin, when David tried to replace him as his commander, because David would say, these sons of what's her name? Zeruiah, my sister, these sons are too hard for me. One of them, Abishai, rode everywhere with him, and Joab was a killer. And he would kill anybody. He'd fight anything, anytime. So would Abishai. They weren't sissies just because they'd kill you. They'd fight anything. So Uriah's killed. And then another prophet comes along. Nathan the prophet. Nathan comes to David. He's a prophet. I didn't have him on the board. Nathan comes to David. And he says, David, I want to tell you a story. There was a man that had many lambs and many sheep. Very wealthy man. And there was a man down the road, he had one little ewe lamb. And he loved that lamb. And this man that had the many lambs went down. When he had guests come into his house, he took that man's one little ewe lamb and killed that lamb. David said, if you'll tell me who he is, I'll kill him. Nathan said, thou art the man. Ooh. Boy, that was a slap in the face. And David said, I have sinned. They began to weep and cry. And God said, that baby. Nathan said, the baby that is going to be born of Bathsheba will die. David prayed and prayed all night after the baby was born. The baby was sick, and God struck the baby with sickness. People say God won't kill. God killed that baby. David mourned all the night, and then after the baby died, he said, "Is the baby dead?" And they were so hesitant to tell him the baby's dead. David got up, washed his face, and said, "That's it. The mourning's over." People say, "Why aren't you mourning anymore?" He said, "I cannot bring him back, but I shall go to him." And then Nathan comes back and stands in front of David. He's the prophet. Nathan was David's prophet as well as Samuel. But Nathan says, "The sword is never going to leave your house, David. From now on, you're going to be under fire for your sin that you've done. Your sin will find you out, won't it?" The next day, in that 13th chapter, Amnon, David's oldest son, plots to have his sister come to his room because she is beautiful, and Amnon rapes his sister. Absalom finds out about it and waits for 2 years, finds Amnon at a festival, kills him. Then Absalom runs for his life and leaves the country. Then he comes back. He's brought back. After he comes back, he's asking David forgiveness. Then Absalom goes and looks in the mirror one day. And he stands out by the gate of the city. He was a good politician, shaking everybody's hands. People say, "You're wonderful, Absalom. Besides that, you're so handsome. And you got all that hair, that long flowing hair." And Absalom began to believe his own press material. Started believing that he was that wonderful. He said, "I need to take the kingdom from my father David." So he gets an army together and heads towards Jerusalem. David hears the word. And David takes 3 generals. You remember who they were? Does anybody know any of them? 3 men that were his top military men. He's going to take with him, and he heads north of Jerusalem. He's going to cross the river. Anybody that heard me teach on this before, the 3 generals he takes, who commands his armies, Joab, Abishai, Ittai. Ittai was what? What was Ittai? What nationality? He was a Gittite, but what was a Gittite? Play the guitar, Mary said. Ittai was a Philistine. He loved David. And they took off and they head north. And David is being run out of Jerusalem. He's headed out of Jerusalem. And Absalom is coming with his army. And Ahithophel defects from David, becomes a traitor, and goes and joins Absalom and says, "I've got some advice for you." Absalom doesn't hear any of his advice. So Ahithophel, who is Bathsheba's grandfather, who starts at giving Absalom advice, he goes home, sets his house in order, and commits suicide. When we get back to this, it sounds like As the World Turns in The Young and Restless. And David's headed out of town with his 3 generals and his army. Does anybody remember the name of the old man that wanted to go with him? He's about 80 years old. And David said, "No, I need you here watching and just looking. You stay here and be a spy in Jerusalem." Does anybody remember the old man's name? Huh? No. Hushai. Hushai was an old man. He's going to stay there and be a spy for David. They head up, go across the river into the land of what we called Jordan, which is actually the land of Ammon. They go, and there's a city over there. It's a city of refuge. Does anybody remember that name? Mahanaim. Mary remembers it. Mahanaim. And they're in that city of refuge, and then Absalom's armies come up there, cross the river, and they're going to attack the city. It's not good to attack David, Abishai, Joab, and Ittai. And they go out and attack Absalom's armies. And David says, "Don't anyone hurt my son Absalom." Absalom had this long hair, and he's riding along on his mule, and he runs into this tree, and he's hung by his hair in the tree. But that's not what kills him. Joab, who has no regard for anyone, comes along, sees him, takes his spear out and throws it into the chest of Absalom. And when they get back home, David is weeping and crying, "Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Joab comes into David and he chews him out like he is a red-headed stepchild. "What are you doing mourning over Absalom? He was trying to take the kingdom." Just bold and gutsy. Remember those generals that commanded those armies, they commanded the nation. They could overthrow the king at the snap of a finger. Joab wasn't afraid of anybody, including Uncle David. Then we get down to the end of 2 Samuel. Get to the end, and we go into 1 Kings. Go into 1 Kings. Now, Solomon is a son of Bathsheba. He's a son of Bathsheba, but that's after the first one died. God has promised, and David has promised, that Solomon be king. But Adonijah, one of David's other sons, has tried to assume the throne in 1 Kings, the first chapter. He has 50 men running before his chariot, and he hasn't received any coronation or he hasn't received any approval of David. And they're saying, "God save King Adonijah." Well, Bathsheba and Nathan the prophet go to David and said, "You promised that Solomon would be king." So David anoints Solomon as king. And when he anoints Solomon, Adonijah says, "Whoops, I think I've messed up." And everybody's saying, "God save King Solomon." Well, Solomon says, "Adonijah, you behave yourself. If you behave yourself, mind your manners," he says, "you can live. If you don't, you're going to die." Well, remember when David was old at the first part of the first chapter of 1 Kings? He's an old man. They go out and find a young girl. Her name is Abishag. Don't sound pretty, but she was gorgeous. And they bring Abishag to David, and they say, "Maybe we can have her give him body heat." Well, that don't do any good. He's too old. No matter how good looking she was. When Ahithophel is separated, Ahithophel says, I think I'll go to Bathsheba and ask her if I can have Abishag. You got to remember that all the concubines belong to the king. This is a major thing. It's major to say, "Can I have one of the concubines?" Absolutely not. And when he asked for one of the concubines, according to this custom in Israel, are you kidding? And when he asked Bathsheba to ask David, or ask Solomon for Abishag, Solomon said, "This man is going to die. We're going to kill him." And he did. We go on through, and I'll cover all this as we go through it. You get up to the 11th chapter. The 11th chapter of when Solomon is king. You get to the 11th chapter. About 1015 is when Solomon becomes king. David is king around 1063 BC. Solomon becomes king, and then in 1 Kings, Solomon becomes king in 1 Kings, the first chapter. First chapter. When you get 1 Kings, the 11th chapter, Solomon gets crazy. Doesn't he? I'm not going to be able... How much time do I have? 12 minutes. I'm going to go through all these kings. This top line, Solomon, his apostasy, allowing his 700 wives, 300 concubines, to continue worshiping their Shemash, Molech gods, Ashtaroth gods, in that 11th chapter of 1 Kings, God says, "I'm going to split the kingdom. You're going to have northern Israel and southern Judah." So you got northern Israel as of, and then you've got the 12th chapter. In the 12th chapter, it happens under Rehoboam. Rehoboam, the son of David, and Jeroboam is his commanding general. Rehoboam is the son of David, the son of Solomon, Rehoboam, and Jeroboam is Rehoboam's commanding general. it's become split because Rehoboam takes some bad advice from his high school friends. They say, you tell him you're king, and you're not going to be easy on him anymore. It's a long story. So Rehoboam says that, and the people of Israel go to Jeroboam the general and say, take us north. We're going to let you be our king. But the lineage of Judah continues all the way through down here. These are all kings of Judah other than Athaliah, the wicked daughter of Ahab. She comes down here, marries Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, tries to kill all of the seed royal, and instead she gets everybody but Joash, and we know the story. Now, where am I? In this 11th chapter, in this 12th chapter, Rehoboam is going to attack Jeroboam. There's a prophet comes along to Rehoboam, if you want to look at it over here in 1 Kings. 1 Kings, the 12th chapter, in this verse 22. But the word of the Lord came unto Shemaiah, the man of God. Well, here's another prophet. We don't have him listed up here. Speak unto Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, and unto all the house of Judah, and unto the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the remnant of the people, say, Thus saith the Lord, you shall not go up, nor fight against your brethren, northern Israel, led by Jeroboam. The children of Israel, return every man to his house, for this thing is from me. And they hearkened therefore unto the word of the Lord, and turned to depart according to the word of the Lord. So Jeroboam says, if I don't do something, these people are going to go back south and join up with Rehoboam. So he says, I'll invent a golden calf, and I'll reduce Jehovah to a golden calf, and I'll tell the people, behold the God that brought you out of Egypt. They weren't worshiping a golden calf. Jeroboam called the golden calf Jehovah, is what he did. Now, after that, God sends a prophet unto Jeroboam, and his name is Ahijah. Now, Ahijah, I may have him down here somewhere. Yeah, right here. 1 Kings, the 14th chapter. Look at 1 Kings 14. 1 Kings 14, Abijah and Ahijah were very common names. So Jeroboam has a son named Abijah. There's also a king named Abijah of southern Judah. Don't get these Abijahs mixed up, and don't get the Manassehs mixed up. So his son gets sick. He tells his wife to dress up and disguise herself in a garb so the prophet Ahijah won't know who she is. And she goes down to Ahijah's house and she tiptoes in. And look at what Ahijah says in verse 6. And it was so, when Ahijah heard the sound of her feet, the feet of Jeroboam's wife, remember, he has brought golden calf into Israel to keep Israel north. As she came into the door, that he said, he's not even looking at her, Come in, thou wife of Jeroboam. He ain't even looking at her. Come in, thou wife of Jeroboam. She thought she had him fooled. She was disguised as something. Maybe it's a street woman. Maybe she had a little shopping cart, a bunch of clothes and stuff in it. Why feignest thou thyself to be another? For I am sent to thee with heavy tidings. You go tell Jeroboam, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Forasmuch as I exalted thee from among the people, and made thee prince over my people Israel, and I took the kingdom away from the house of David. How did he do that? The inheritance belonged to Ephraim, and Ephraim is the head tribe of northern Israel. So he took the inheritance away, left southern Judah. Benjamin joined southern Judah in the southern two tribes, being southern Israel. So when he says, I took the kingdom away, he's saying, I took Ephraim's inheritance and gave it to you with 10 northern tribes. and gave it to thee, and yet thou hast not been as my servant David, who kept my commandments, who followed me with all his heart, to do that only which was right in mine eyes, but thou hast done evil above all that were before thee. For thou hast gone and made the other gods and molten images to provoke me to anger, and hast cast me behind thy back. You've thrown me away, Jeroboam. Therefore, behold, I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam, and will cut off of Jeroboam him that pisseth against the wall. What does that mean? When a man urinates out in public, he always finds something to keep it from splattering on. He's saying, I will emasculate you, and you will never have any more children to reign ever again. You say, that sounds awful crude. God gets crude sometimes. That's why he would have David go out. That's why Saul said, David, go out and bring me 100 foreskins of the Philistines. That don't mean circumcise them. That meant took all the genitalia off 100 of them. David brought back 200. The whole idea was that so they can never reproduce any more enemies to come up against God's people. He says, you won't have any heirs to your kingdom. And him that is shut up and left in Israel, and take away the remnant of the house of Jeroboam, as a man taketh away dung till it be all gone, him that dieth of Jeroboam in the city shall the dogs eat. You've raised up idols in that 12th chapter. And him that dieth in the field shall the fowls of the air eat, for the Lord hath spoken it. Arise thou therefore, get thee to thine own house, wife of Jeroboam. And when thy feet enter the city, the child is going to die. You don't fool with God, do you? I don't have time to go through this. But Elijah comes along, faces off Ahab, goes to Mount Carmel in that 17th, 18th, and 19th chapter. Elijah is the prophet to Ahab. Micaiah gets Ahab into battle. When Ahab gets Jehoshaphat to go with him to go battle the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, and Jehoshaphat says, I've got to talk to a prophet first. Ahab says, those prophets always say bad things about me. They don't like me. I guess not. You murderer, you killer. And Jehoshaphat, being a righteous man, running around with Ahab, which he shouldn't do, says, let's talk to Micaiah. Micaiah says, if you go into battle, Ahab, Israel is going to be without a shepherd. It's going to be sheep without a shepherd. He said, I told you, Jehoshaphat, they don't ever say good things about me. He said, you tell me good things. Micaiah said, okay, go ahead to battle. You'll be okay. It's really funny. And then God causes an evil spirit to come upon one of the prophets of Ahab's priests of Baal, and they prophesy, you're going to be all right. And he goes into battle, and he trades uniforms with Jehoshaphat, and the Philistines the Syrians chase down Jehoshaphat, and they say, oh, who's under that? You're not what we want. Where's that Ahab? And a man draws a bow at a venture, and the arrow goes and strikes Ahab between the harness, and Ahab dies. And he pulls over his chariot, and the blood comes off, and the dogs lick his blood like Elijah the prophet told him it would do. Then you get to Elisha is the prophet under Jehoram, and Jehoram is a two-bit king. Now this is northern Israel. And these are the southern Judah. Here's southern Judah. After northern Israel's carried away, here's surviving southern Judah. And Jonah, somewhere in the neighborhood of 786, he's king under Jeroboam the second. Here's Jeroboam the second down here. Right here. So while Jeroboam the second, Jonah is the king, is the prophet here. Hosea is a prophet somewhere around 786. I drew an arrow over here because he's a prophet about the same time as Jonah, so they must have known one another. Then Amos is a prophet in 760, not long after, possibly that he knew Hosea and Jonah, and this is during the kings of Israel. Micah was prophet under Ahaz. After northern Israel is carried away, all that's left, the surviving kingdom, is southern Judah. And then Amos is about the same time under Zechariah and Pekah. Uzziah, Jeroboam, Zechariah and Pekah. I put down here, notice the prophets sometimes cover several kings. Kings died fast, prophets lived long. That's the way it worked. Isaiah prophesied 50 years. Jeremiah prophesied 40 years. A lot of these guys prophesied 25, 30 years against Israel, saying judgment's going to come. Stop that worshiping all these idols. And then Isaiah's prophecy is under Hezekiah. Isaiah, wonderful man of God, and Hezekiah, one of the greatest men that ever lived. Hezekiah and Isaiah at the same time. And that's when Sennacherib came down and attacked southern Judah while he was carrying away northern Israel. And it wasn't time for southern Judah because they had nothing but righteousness there. And that's in the 18th, 19th chapters of 2 Kings. And then Nahum is under Manasseh. It may have been Nahum or Habakkuk in that 21st chapter of 2 Kings, where that the prophet says God's going to wipe Israel clean, and a man wipes a plate, turning it upside down. And it very well could have been Nahum, but that was under Manasseh's reign. Manasseh had done more evil than anybody else. It could have been Habakkuk, or it could have been Nahum, either one. And that was during Manasseh to Josiah in 1 Kings 21:22. Zephaniah was also during Josiah's reign. And then Habakkuk was somewhere between 608 and 598. We know southern Judah was carried captive in 586. So a lot of these prophets very well could have known each other, even though their names are not mentioned among the kings. It's alluded to. Some of them are mentioned in the kings. Then Huldah, remember her when Hilkiah found the book of the Lord. Remember that? And he gave it to Shaphan the scribe, and he took it to Josiah. And Josiah read the book of the Lord. It had been completely done away with because his grandfather Manasseh and his father Ammon had just literally forgotten God and built up all idols again. His great-grandfather was Hezekiah. So Josiah cleans up the land. He sends the book of the law to Huldah, and she's a prophetess. And she says, these are the things that's going to happen to the land. And then Jeremiah, the last prophet in southern Judah, he prophesies from about 626 to 586 under Josiah to somewhere around Zedekiah. Well, we know he was prophesying Zedekiah. Some believe he was prophesying back as far as Josiah. And that's in 2 Chronicles 36 where they're carried away. 2 Kings 25, they're carried away. Jeremiah, these are all the same event, different accounts. And these are the prophets after the captivity. After they're carried captive, southern Judah, 586. Ezekiel is believed to be in 597. Obadiah is a question mark. Some believe it is the husband of the woman that dies that Elisha comes to in 1 Kings 4:1. And then Haggai and Zechariah, they're a group all themselves. When Israel is overthrown in 586, in 539, the Babylons that overthrew Israel are overcome by the Persians, and then they quit building. The first decree is given 538 to rebuild the temple. 536 they quit building, and then in 520 God touches the heart in Ezra the 5th chapter of these two men to tell Israel, get back building. Daniel, some say 605, some say he was a little boy when he was carried to Babylon. We don't know. But this is where these prophets, all these prophets belong. Israel is a kingdom from 1 Samuel through 2 Chronicles, and these come in Ezra. These come in Ezra and Nehemiah, and as Daniel is in the book of Daniel also. You'll see that he's prophesying to Nebuchadnezzar, interpreting his dream, and Daniel becomes a friend of Darius, the Persian king, or Mede king. I hope you can kind of get a picture of this. Does this help some? Maybe I covered too much territory. I didn't cover a lot of the details. I'm going to put this back on the board next week. I've gone through all this with all of you over and over, haven't I? Over and over. This is the picture timeline of the Old Testament in a nutshell. I put here, you fill in the events and characters. You got all kinds of characters and events all through here. If you get a hold of this, just this timeline, you'll understand basically what the entire Old Testament's about. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word and for truth. Cause us to continue this message. Lord, I pray for the flock that they will be strong in the truth. Lord, that's what we need is the word. We don't need all these mushy messages. I pray for the sheep. Open up many doors for the ministry. Open up more TV and more of the internet. God will praise you and glorify you for everything. Lead us in a way according to your will. Cause us to bow to your will in everything. And we give you praise in Christ's name. Amen. We didn't cover a whole lot of things. I hope you understand. Too many things. But if you've been here, you'll understand it. Just keep coming.
Thanks for the meal.
Okay. Let me give you something here.
I was a little hungry after missing last week.
Huh? You're a little hungry. A little hungry. I know. Huh?
Appalachians.
Huh? Oops.
I love it. I love it.
There's a lot of stuff, wasn't it?
I love it. I love it.
Hey, what's that chapter about the affliction afflicting the soul? Isaiah 50, about when they afflict their soul.
Oh, 58.
Oh, Isaiah 50.
Isaiah 58, yeah. We don't need Don't race that. Don't race that. Don't copy it. Don't race it.
Okay, you know that right now. Because I'm going to forget. If you want to come early, that's fine.
Oh, I know it.
Just email. I've been here a while, so it's okay. Yeah, it is big. It's all way out. Okay, did you send me that? I misplaced the last thing you sent me. Turn in my info. You sent me another one? No, I'll check. Okay. I didn't. Well, my daughter didn't tell me. You don't mind calling me.
Just on the
That'll remind me of too. I love cheese. How you doing? Hey.
You're preaching against those kings.
And I like to use the skeleton. That's the skeleton. That's not the skeleton. All the events we had from the evil to but these other books are simply